All right, we're ready to go here. Well, we got a returning champion here, Hans Dietrich. Hello, welcome to meet Tina. Hans, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good. Long time no talk. I just interviewed Hans last week about the Buddhist monk, the connection with the Buddhist monk and the Sirius star seed, or the planet, or civilization. And I have to tell you, Hans, it was really, really good. I really enjoy your talk, and this is why I'm inviting him to come back today. And today you're going to be talking about what the ancient symbols, which I found
Yes.
to be. Yep, I went into his workshop at the Aliens event. I believe it was in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Yes, correct.
And it was mind blowing. So today we're gonna be showing, what Dan's gonna show you. It's gonna be mind blowing as well. So let's go for it, Hans.
Excellent. Well, I
Yes.
guess dive right in.
Dive right in because that's a lot of information. I remember that. Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I took out the second half of this, so it's not going to be so much around
Oh, you
artificial
did. Okay,
intelligence. Yeah.
hopefully, yeah. That was all great information that you show.
Well, if we get to that, I can bring it back in. It's still in the deck, but
Cool.
yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. All right, let's do it. And I'm sure everyone's gonna really love this one. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's start. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, I saw your full screen. Yes, yes. And definitely just before you start, I mentioned to you earlier on your last talk, your last video, a lot of people love it.
Okay,
Absolutely
excellent.
love it. Yes.
So this
All
is
right.
what I call the magic of symbols.
Yeah.
And so you might ask yourself, what is a symbol? Excuse me,
Mhm.
I have a little hoarse throat today. A symbol is a visual representation of a concept, and this concept can be something that's historical. It can be an object as a symbol. Status can be a symbol. Icons, logos, and emblems can also be symbols. And so symbols stretch across a whole variety of different topics.
Mhm.
But let's start with historical. And so historical symbols come to us from cave art, ancient sites, and civilizations. And one of the oldest pieces of cave art that we've recognized as being very symbolic is what we call the sorcerer, which was found it's from around 13,000 BC, and it's anthropomorphic art found in the Lascaux cave of France. And what it shows is a shaman in a transcendental meditational state transforming into a deer. And so this is one of the oldest symbols that we've discovered in ancient times, and it's found in this amazing cave in France, along with
Wow.
lots of other symbology there. But we can step forward to Pillar 27, the lion or the leopard, which was found at Göbekli Tepe, and it's dated to about 10,500 BC. And so here we have what is called a relief. So they took this giant T pillar, and instead of carving into it, they removed pieces of it to create this lion or leopard, which is very difficult to do. And we're told that Göbekli Tepe is one of the sites that was made by hunters and gatherers. However, only about 5% of it has been unearthed, and the space that it occupies is several kilometers. And so the thought that this was a hunter and gatherer civilization is very difficult to grasp, because it would require a civilization that has an understanding of mathematics, an understanding of astrology, an understanding of construction. You have to be able to feed all the workers that are at this site. And then around 10,500 BC, they intentionally buried it. And so it's fascinating to see symbology on all the pillars at Göbekli Tepe. And then we can step another 5,000 years forward, and we have the Lord of the Harvest, this Ninirta, coming out of Sumer from about 5200 BC. And so there's a lot of symbology going on with this. In one hand, he has the pine cone. On the other hand is what they call the man bag. And we think that perhaps the bag held seeds or other artifacts for trade. And it's always interesting, these ancient Sumerian depictions, because it always shows these gods with wristwatches or armbands. I've always thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can step forward another 2,000 years to around 3100 BC. And at the site of Egypt, Elephantine Island in Egypt, is this depiction of what they call Azgat Nefer. And Azgat means water, and Nefer means harmony. And so this is called the harmony of water. And it's very symbolic because you will see this symbol in a lot of hieroglyphs in Egypt depicted at different temples. And what it represents, harmonious water, or water that's basically safe to drink. And so these are ancient civilizations and ancient symbols that come to us from the old times. But then this takes us into objects, since these are primarily objects. Objects as symbols. What's that?
Sorry for interrupting you. The sounds, I think there's a little bit, if you can actually adjust the sound, a little bit.
I'll turn my fan off so that it's not as loud. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Very hot. It's very hot here.
Oh my God, yeah, it's been hot here. It's the same thing, guys. I mean, I got my thing on. Yeah, so that could be the fan that's blowing.
Yeah, I think so. I think my mic was picking it up. Okay, so objects and symbols. One of my favorite objects as a symbol in my research and in the information that I've come across is the Statue of Liberty. And the Statue of Liberty is interesting because to most of us, we think that the Statue of Liberty represents freedom. Well, liberty and freedom are not the same thing. And we also think the Statue of Liberty is a woman, but in all actuality, the Statue of Liberty is what we consider a androgyne, or somebody that's either neither woman or male, but could be depicted as both. Because the statue is, as we know, this goddess Columbia. She's the goddess of America. But Columbia is also a representation of Venus, which is a representation of Lucifer. So there's a male form there. And the statue itself is always depicted with the light being the light bearer and the commandments in the other hand. So it has a very interesting aspect to it. And so basically, it represents Columbia, Lucifer, Venus, Inanna, Ishtar, Kali, Freya. It's a goddess of love, wisdom, warfare, and destiny.
Wow.
And so it's interesting because, as I said, when people think about the Statue of Liberty, they think about freedom. And liberty and freedom are not the same things. And so when you pull into a harbor as a boat, your ship breaks the water and it berths in the port. And so we have interesting terminology around nautical expression, because this basically comes from like a woman giving birth as well. The boat will berth in the port and it will break the water. And a lot of this information comes from the now deceased Jordan Maxwell, who put a lot of this stuff together. And so it's interesting because the captain then is presented, once the ship breaks the water, berths in the port, the captain then presents the port master the manifest of the ship, the certificate of manifest. And this is called the birth certificate. So how fascinating is that?
Right.
Right. And so then what is liberty? Well, liberty does not mean freedom. So the crew or the passengers have to then ask the captain, do we have liberty to go ashore? And so liberty then is considered an extended shore leave, basically. It's permission for an extended shore leave. The passengers are permitted to go ashore through a visa or a visit permit. And so liberty does not mean freedom. It just gives you permission to be in the land, and in this case, in the land of America.
Wow.
What also is fascinating about the Statue of Columbia is we find Columbia everywhere. Columbia is a very fascinating scenario. Back to freedom and liberty. One of the key aspects of the statue is that we see it from beneath. We don't see it ever from above. And so the statue is standing on a pedestal on a star fort that's on what we call Liberty Island. It's near Ellis Island in New York Harbor. And what's fascinating about it is if you go above the statue and you look down, it is still shackled to the podium that it is standing on. And so obviously this does not mean freedom. And so this is a depiction of the foot, the left foot of the statue, still being shackled to the podium.
Wow.
So this isn't free. This is bound, and so this is the binding of liberty. But as I said, we find this concept of Columbia everywhere. We have the country of Columbia. In Europe, in Prague, there's this statue of Lucifer on top of one of the buildings, and it's the exact same pose. It has the corona or the crown of light. It's holding the light, and in the other hand, it has the 10 Commandments, or the commandments in general. Columbia is named after Columbus. Well, Columbus wasn't his name. He was known as Cristobal de Colon, and he was the illegitimate child of Pope Innocent VIII. And we know this because his family insignia is on Pope Innocent VIII's entombing. But for the purposes of exploration, he went by Columbus because he was sailing under the goddess Columbia's name and insignia. We also have the Columbia Gorge, which is right up the river from me, about an hour. This is Lookout Butte, and in the background is it's called Beacon Rock. So the Columbia Gorge is named after Columbia. We have the Columbia Space Shuttle, which sadly, burned up in re-entry in 2003. We have Columbia Pictures. We have Columbus, Ohio. We have the District of Columbia, which is Washington, D.C. We have British Columbia. We have Columbia Sportswear. And so as you see, we're surrounded by this depiction of Columbia, or the goddess or god of the Statue of Liberty. And even the Columbia logo for Columbia Pictures is the light bearer. It's this goddess figure holding the light in a very similar pose as the statue. And so this is basically an object as a symbol. Next, we get into status symbols. And this comes from culture creation of the desire and wealth, basically. And so if you're, doing pretty well, you go out and you buy yourself a new Rolex for around $20,000, or a new yacht for around $20 million, or a Bugatti for $3 million, or a Gulfstream for $10 million. And these all represent status, but status is just another way to divide people. And that's my quote, because it shows people what they have, but it also shows other people what they don't. And so it creates this inequality. And so it's interesting, growing up in Nepal has an interesting caste system. And so you have everything from the untouchables, a lot of them sitting on the side of the road crushing rocks to make gravel, all the way up to the Brahmins and Kshetris who own banks and hotels and restaurants. And it was interesting because in the early 2000s, we would have construction companies coming out of Dubai, out of the United Arab Emirates, looking for people to come work for 5 years to help build some of these new gated communities. And so they show up in Nepal and they go to the upper caste, basically, and they're like, hey, we have all these jobs. Would any of you be interested in it? And of course, the Brahmins and Kshetris looked at these people and they're like, why would we be interested in this? We own hotels, we own banks, we have gas stations, we have airports. Why would we even be interested? And so the little rock crusher on the side of the road is like, oh, sign me up, please. I'll go work for 5 years. It's got to be better than crushing, rocks on the side of the road and huffing all the pollution from the cars. And so the rock crusher, basically the untouchable, goes to Dubai, works through a 5-year contract, decides, wow, I'm making some pretty good money here. I'm going to work through another 5-year contract. So 10 years later, this person comes back to Nepal and in Nepalese standards is wealthy, is rich, and decides to buy a plot of land and build their own gated community because they've also gained all these skills. And so what it's done is it's tipped the balance of power and money of the caste system in Nepal, so that the have-nots are now the ones that have. And so it's been very interesting to watch, but it also shows how divided we are as a society.
I agree.
So then this gets into iconography. And so iconography is around us all day long. It's the apps on our smartphones. It's the emoticons that we use when we text people to show our emotion. It also deals with signs, like signs on the street, and time. All these are considered, iconographic symbols. And 5 of the most, used symbols all day long are our app icons, like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Google. We take these for granted because we see them all day long, but these all have different representations. So Instagram looks like a camera, but it also looks like the Earth and the moon. TikTok is a note. So TikTok, right? It makes its own note. The F of Facebook kind of has a Masonic representation to it, and it means it can represent Tubal Cain, who was a Masonic character, but Tubal Cain also had, another depiction, and that was that of John Dee, who was the court magus of Queen Elizabeth I. And his symbol was the Tubal Cain, but it also was 007. And so this is where we get the symbology for James Bond from. But it's interesting that it ends up in the Facebook logo. And then we have X for Twitter. X marks the spot, right? And then Google is this spiraling of red, yellow, and green and blue, these alchemical colors, into a center point, basically. And so these are the 5 most familiar app icons that we utilize all day long, and we don't really realize what they're representing. And then we have popular emoticons, and so those are the like, the love, ha ha ha, wow, sad, angry, and we use these to replace our own emotions when we're texting people, because it's hard to get emotion across in text.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that this is very similar to what you see in Egyptian hieroglyphs or Cometian hieroglyphs, is they are expressing an emotion or something to deal with time and an emotion. And so that way, when you're reading the glyphs, you can go, oh, this is representing, like before, Azgat Nefer. It's an emotion around water. It's this healthy, clean, harmonious water. And so this gets us into our daily signs and symbols. So we have our restroom signs. We have our traffic signs, you know, the stop sign, the red, yellow, green of the traffic light as well. Go, caution, stop. And then we have our, caution, biological and nuclear signs as well, which tell us danger, So signs and symbols basically help us through our day, because they take these complex, complex concepts, and they put them into a visual representation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting because this also goes into time. And time is symbolic because it's the symbology of the magical number of 8. And so everything, around symbols comes back to some element of magic. So we have 8 fingers on our hands. Thumbs aren't considered fingers. And so we have our 4 major fingers. And then the thumb is its own opposable bone, basically, but it's not considered a finger on the hand. So there's 8 fingers on our hands. There are 3 sets of 8 in a 24-hour day. The first 8 is the morning, the second 8 is the afternoon, and the third 8 is the evening.
Mm.
The infin 8 symbol, right? Infinity. And so here we have 8 again represented over and over and over. And so basically, when you put your pencil to paper, infinity symbol is the symbol that you can continuously draw without lifting up your pencil. And then we have the compass points, which there are 8 of. There's north, south, east, and west, but then there's also northeast, southeast, northwest, and southwest. And so time has a huge representation around this magical symbol of 8. So this takes us into my study into the magic of symbols. And these are the building blocks of all symbology. And this comes out of some very, very ancient times, and was always represented by a circle, a triangle, and a square. And so to the Zoroastrians, man is symbolized by 3 elements, one on top of another: the circle, the triangle, and the square. The body should be triangular, the mind circular. The triangle represents the generation of energies, and it's the most stable physical posture. The circle symbolizes serenity and perfection, the source of unlimited techniques. And the square stands for solidity, the basis of applied control. And this comes from Ishiba Morai, who was the founder of Aikido. And so Aikido is very much, a practice that brings into play the symbology of the circle, the triangle, and the square.
Okay.
And so what's important about these shapes? Well, these shapes make up every symbol, every logo, and every emblem and representation out there. There is some aspect of a circle, a triangle, and a square. And when I went to design school, we didn't have the advent of computers at that point. And so we had to learn how to create these shapes so that they were photo ready. Nowadays, you just click in Illustrator or Photoshop and you have, an instant shape of a circle, a triangle, or a square. But in the old days, we actually had to make them. And so how do you draw these shapes? Well, it's interesting because you can draw these shapes using the compass and the squared straight edge. And so it's interesting that you use the compass to create the angles that cross in the middle, and then you basically build the rest of a triangle, for instance, using the straight edge. You can do the same with a circle. The compass creates the circle, and you can do the same with the square. The compass and the straight edge both create the square. And it's interesting because the compass and the straight edge is also the major symbol or emblem around Freemasonry. And so you have the compass, the square, and the G. Well, G represents God or gnosis, knowledge, or geometry, which is what this symbol makes. So let's look at these symbols, because these symbols are incredibly magical, and they change the more you add to them. And so they all have basically adapters that can be added to them to change their physical meaning. So the first is just looking at the symbols themselves. So we have the circle, the triangle, and the square. If we add the first multiplier to it, we would add gematria, or a number system that would go with this. And so the circle has one side, it's one continuous side. The triangle has three sides, and the square has four sides. And when you add all these up, you get the magical number of 8. Going back to the 8. So we can add the next adapter or multiplier to them, and that would be adding color theory. And so adding color theory, the circle becomes blue, the triangle becomes red, and the square becomes green. We can take it one step further, and these are alchemical colors in a sense. Red, green, and blue are light colors, and so when you project a red light, a green light, and a blue light, and you bring all their lights together in a focal point in the center, and I have this later on in the slide, I'll show it, it basically becomes white. But they also could be used as pigments, alchemical pigments, and so the green, the red, and the blue, when mixed together, create this very rich dark brown or black color. And so they have two different elements, whether it's a pigment or a light color, but they are definitely alchemical colors. And so let's add another multiplier to this. And so the next multiplier is elemental theory.
Wow.
And so the blue circle becomes water. The red triangle becomes fire, and the green square becomes earth. And this is interesting because these are also considered alchemical elements. And so when you're trying to make the philosopher's stone, or this, as we were discussing in the last interview, around the Sintamani stone, the philosopher's stone, gives longevity of life. And the alchemists will take what they call the prima materia, which is the earth, the sacred fire, which is either a burning fire or a burning plasma fire, and then a distilled water, or the sacred water. And when they boil the earth and the water with the sacred fire, they're left with this black goop or red goop or white powder, depending on how far they take the process. And this is what becomes known as the philosopher's stone, or a powder of monoatomic elements, basically. So we can then take this one step further and add another multiplier, and that's dimensional theory, dimensionality. And so the blue water circle becomes the blue water sphere. The red fire triangle becomes the red fire tetrahedron, or pyramid. And so the Greeks, pyramidos, meant the fire in the middle. And so this is where the word pyramid comes from. And to the green earth, it becomes the green earth cube. And so it's interesting because a cube also represents a square form of the earth. And I mean that by stating that there are 6 sides to a cube. There are 6 continents on the planet. So you have North America, South America, Eurasia, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica. And so these are your 6 major continental groups represented by 6 sides of the square. And so if you look at all these elements and then you stack all these elements, so the blue sphere is on top of the red fire tetrahedron, which then sits on top of the green square, we start coming back to what Zoroaster was talking about, dealing with the shape of the universe and the shape of the human. And so basically, by stacking them, this is what we get. And so the head element becomes the element of water. The upper torso becomes the element of fire, and the lower torso becomes the element of earth. Why is this? Well, in our upper torso, we have all of our water elements. We ingest water through our mouth. We have our tear ducts. We have our salivary glands. We have our mucous membranes. We have fluid in our ear that helps stabilize us. We have fluid in our eyes that help us see. We have fluid in our pineal gland as well that helps us basically with the pineal gland, the inner eye. There's brain fluid. And all of our sweat glands start in our head. And so when we first start to sweat, we start sweating, out of our forebrow. And so all of our water elements end up in the upper portion of our body, the head, the water sphere element. So the next underneath that is basically the fire element. And this is where the pyramid or the tetrahedron sits. And this is also the middle torso of our body, or the upper torso of our body, is where all of our generation organs reside, things that help us generate life in our own bodies. So we have our heart pumping the rich blood through our system. We have our lungs that take in oxygen and convert that into energy. We have our stomach that digests our food, along with our gallbladder, liver, kidneys, and bladder. And in the woman, the sacred womb space, the womb generator, is also within the upper torso. And this is where the next generation of life comes from in a symbolic term. And so therefore, the lower torso becomes the earth elements. And this is where we give back to the earth through fertilization.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be through our feces or our urine, our excrement is fertilizing the earth back. We are grounded to the earth through our feet. Mm-hmm. The sacred egg of the woman, which becomes fertile, also resides within this space and then goes up into the womb space and generates the next life. And in a man, the sacred earth seed of the man is also found in the lower torso. And so it's interesting that our lower torso is the fertility, our mid and upper torso is the generation, the generator of energy. Mm. And our upper head is our water element. And so this creates what is called the human. And if we break human up into two words, we get another symbol out of that, where hue represents a color or colored. So the hue man is a representation of the colored man, which we all are. And so it's interesting that these three shapes, I call the magical symbols, basically, like I said, can be found everywhere. And we are taught them at a very young age through our toys. So this is a toy that you basically have to match the shapes to their symbolic shapes on the board. And so it's interesting that we have a green square, a blue circle, and a red triangle that we have to, figure out how to fit into these shapes. And so this comes to us from a very, very young age. And as I said, it also comes to us through alchemy. And so on the left, we have the overlap of the red, green, and blue color spectrum. And as it gets closer to the center, it becomes white. And so this overlapping aspect creates the white light, or the light body, in a sense, which is what the Philosopher's Stone is supposed to do as well. It creates, an etheric, long living body for you. But then we also have the mixing of pigments, which creates the rich black. And so you have cyan, which is your blue, magenta, which is sort of your red, and then yellow. And these overlapping create black, or rich black. And so this is also the alchemical process. And so where else do we see this? Well, we see the alchemical phases of black, red, yellow, and white. These are the different phases that the Philosopher's Stone will go through in the alchemical process. And we see this represented by the MasterCard logo, which is also showing two suns. And so there's somewhat of a serious symbology in the MasterCard, as well as an alchemical process going on in the MasterCard, because you have the yellow overlapping the red, and then you have the black undertone of the white lettering. And so all four colors are represented. But we also see the triangle, the circle, and the square in other elements around us all day long. And that would be in our remote controls. And so the remote control is interesting, because if the triangle is a representation of fire, then it's interesting that it's being used as the play button, because the play, when you hit play, it starts the fire of the entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so the square, or the earth element, stops the fire or the entertainment and grounds it. The pause is halfway in between, and so it kind of gives pause to the grounding. And it's interesting that the record button is always a round button. Well, water records information, and so I find it interesting that as the water element, it also is a recorder of information and store of information. So in the symbology on the remote control, it is represented by the record button. And then we have fast forward, which shows us the different directions for which the fire is burning. So it's either burning forward or it's burning backward. And the power button is also incredibly fascinating, because it is sort of a representation of faster than light travel. When you hit the power button, something comes on automatically. And so between hitting the power button and something coming on, there's a flash of a second. But in reality, you're creating this wormhole between the remote control and the device that you're turning on. And so it has this faster than light, approach to it, in a sense. And we also find these elements on the remote controls for video games. So it's interesting to see that the triangle, the circle, and the square is, like I said, found everywhere. We even find it in the Squid Games, on the masks of the characters in the Squid Games. I thought that was very fascinating.
Wow, that's interesting. Yes.
So there's this subtle programming going on constantly around us. And what's interesting is we can take these three symbols and use them as combination symbols. And so in the combination symbols, we have the alchemical representation of the philosopher's stone. Here we are again, which is a circle, a triangle, and a square, but then there's an inner circle as well. We find this at the Knights Templar door knocker in Germany. We have the circle, the square, and the triangle, and inside is the sacred rose and an eyeball. And so very fascinating that this is a Knights Templar representation. And for the Harry Potter fans in your crowd, it also represents the Deathly Hallows. And so the triangle basically represents the invisibility cloak. The circle represents the resurrection stone. And the square, in this case, is a representation of the wand, or in this case, the elder's wand. And I find it really fascinating that the wand of the ancient Druids was made out of the wood of the holly tree. And so this is where we get the representation of holly wood. And so, like in Harry Potter, when you use your wand and you create the Patronus spell, you are bedazzling whoever you're putting the spell on with this bright white light that fixates them and bedazzles them. Well, isn't this what Hollywood does? And so instead of, using a wand and this bright light on us, they're basically using the silver screen and projecting the light onto that, which bedazzles us. And it all comes out of this place near where you are in LA called Hollywood. And so the Hollywood representation symbolically between, the place and what the actual Hollywood was, the Druid's wand, is really fascinating. We also have the combination of the triangle and the circle and the square found in the sacred feminine. And so to the ancient Cometians or Egyptians, the Ankh was known as the key of life. And this is where we get the cross from, which is very interesting in Christianity. But it also is a representation of the feminine. And so you have the two triangles on the side. This is the fallopian tubes that house the eggs. You have the circular element, which is the womb, and you have the square element, which is the entrance, basically, into the womb. And so this is where we get this representation of life, or in this aspect, the key of life. And so this shape has been usurped throughout time. Basically, it was usurped into the cross. It then has been repurposed in more recent times into the actual symbol for the female, which is the circle and the square. But it has always represented the womb. And that's where it has the key of life symbology found with it. So then this takes us into symbolic logos. And this is where I have, fun with this topic, because as a graphic designer, I'm creating logos and symbols all day long.
Yeah, this is fun.
Oftentimes we don't know what these logos or symbols that we're surrounded by actually mean. And so to me, it's fascinating because there's, a lot of esoteric and occult symbology within corporate logos and combination logos in plain sight. Occult only means, people think, oh, it deals with occult. No, occult actually means hidden. And esoteric, in reference to knowledge, is knowledge that not many people have, but is, it's a deep topic of research, but it becomes esoteric because not a lot of people are very much interested in it, which is why they can hide symbols, and occult symbology in plain sight within corporate logos. And so one of my favorite logos that represents this is the 7-Up logo. And it looks a little bit phallic. It sure does. But if we start thinking in terms of esoteric knowledge, 7-Up has a representation of the 7 chakras bubbling like 7-Up the drink, from the core or root chakra, which is always represented by a red circle or red circular element. So 7-Up is a representation of your 7 chakras bubbling up to your pineal gland or your crown chakra. And so these are the 7 chakras as they bubble up from the bottom. I do, I feel, I am, I love, I speak, I see, I know.
Very
and so
cool. Mm-hmm.
I've always loved the 7-Up logo because there's so much hidden within it that we haven't noticed it.
I would
Because
never thought of that. Yes.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we think of it as a bubbly drink that's refreshing. Another interesting logo that has symbology hidden in plain sight is the FedEx logo.
Mm.
And so this is what we call a word mark. And basically, a word mark is a stylized font that spells out your company name. Well, FedEx is short for Federal Express, but hidden in the E and the X is the arrow pointing forward, because FedEx is a shipping company. And so they hide in plain sight in the negative space their intention of being a shipping company.
Mm-hmm.
And when they took over Kinko's and they became a print shipping and mail box company, they used the old Kinko's logo, which is an asterisk. And so it's interesting that an asterisk is actually 3 arrows pointing toward the center. And that arrow then also is pointing forward, the direction of the future and the direction of shipping, basically. And so the FedEx and Kinko's or FedEx combination logos are very fascinating because there's hidden knowledge in plain sight if you know what to look for. Another logo that I think is very fascinating is the CenturyLink logo.
Mm.
And so century, link, century means 100, but it has more connotation to it because it also represents technology. And you're linking to that technology. Well, CenturyLink is an internet provider company. So it's interesting that this is their representation. But if you look at the sun logo of CenturyLink, it's green, which is interesting because green also represents technology.
Mm.
But if you start actually looking at that green sun itself, there are 6 light green triangles. There are 6 dark green triangles.
Correct.
And there are 6 lines that intersect in the middle. And so here we have the 666 magical symbology hidden within the CenturyLink logo. And it's interesting because 666 does not mean the mark of the beast, which we're constantly told. That is misdirection. It means that it's the message from the spirit realm or the altered, an alert to shift your focus, basically.
Wow.
If you start seeing 666, that is what it magically is representing. It's showing you the spirit realm and you need to focus. And it's really interesting because CenturyLink is owned by another company, and this company is called Lumen. And so Lumen means to illuminate or light. And so here's your light bearer, your Luciferian reference.
Mm-hmm.
And the E has been broken up to be stylized. Well, the E represents El or God. So we have this Saturnian and Luciferian symbology within the parent company of CenturyLink that also has this magical symbol hidden within it. Another spherical symbol found within logos is that of AT&T. And so AT&T is an interesting one because it's showing us the water world, but it's also showing us the clouds above the water world.
Mm.
And if we really want to look into the symbology, the clouds also represent the cloud, like the technology cloud, but it also represents the lines of technology. And so AT&T, again, is one of these logos that's hiding more esoteric knowledge within plain sight. So these are circular logos. The next would be triangular logos. And so one of my favorites is Delta, because hidden within the Delta logo is actually 3 pyramids. So you have the pyramid at the bottom, you have the negative space between the pyramid at the bottom, and then you have the chevron of the pyramid at the top. And if you look at it, they represent the pyramid in growth or something moving into the air or something in flight. And so this is interesting because this is the representation of Delta. But Delta is also the triangular shape where a river meets a larger body of water, like the Nile Delta. And so it's interesting that they would have Delta as a representation with the pyramids, because there's a huge, symbolic connection here with Egypt, or ancient Egypt in a sense, because you have the 3 pyramids of Giza and the Nile Delta all represented in one logo.
Wow. Interesting. Mm-hmm.
So another fascinating logo set is that of Google Drive. Here we have another triangular pyramidical logo that represents the alchemical colors, very similar to Google Play. But Google Play also has a different representation to it because it represents the Solomonic sigil of Lucifer. I don't know if you saw it. Yeah. So when you break that shape apart and you move it over and flip it, it basically those 4 triangles or 3 triangles at the top become the Google Play logo. And so I've always found they're hiding it in plain sight. It's right there in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
And so play, again, is a play on the words of lighting the fire. And so what does Lucifer do? Lucifer holds the torch. It's the light bearer. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that there's a play on words, because words are also spells, and spells are also symbols. And so
that's fascinating.
We have this play over. So then we get into square or cube logos. And one of my favorites is Rubik's. Not so much for the word mark, but for the actual symbology of the square or the cube itself. And so as I discussed earlier, we have this representation of Earth, the 6 continents. And so the Rubik's Cube is interesting because it segues into the next chapter of this. It segues into the magical symbol of 9. Mm-hmm. So on a Rubik's Cube, each side has 9 facets. And in order to solve the game, you have to basically combine all 9 facets of color on each side. And so this is interesting because if we're thinking of, divide and conquer and rulers, not just the physical ruler that you draw with, but rulers over the land, what do they want to do? They want to combine as much land, as many facets of land under their control as they can. And so in a sense, the Rubik's Cube is you conquering these different elements of the land, or basically the continents. So there's a fascinating aspect with the Rubik's logo and Rubik's representation. And so why is 9 such a sacred number? Mm-hmm. Well, 9 is a sacred number because all elements of 9 add up to 9. 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. 8 plus 1 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 2 plus 7 is 9. 9 times 4 is 36. 3 plus 6 is 9. 45. 4 plus 5 is 9. 54, 63, 72, 81, 90, 99, 108. And the list keeps going on. Everything adds up to 9. And so 9 basically is called the work in magical circles. Mm-hmm. 10 is the master and 11 is the completion. And so when you have this number 911, right, 911, it represents the completion of the work. And so I've always found that was a fascinating number because of the symbolic representation of what it represents. 911 is the number you call for help. 911 is also, the day that the 2 towers fell. And the 2 towers are very symbolic to the Masons because they represent the towers of Joachim and Boaz. And so these are the 2 pillars, the foundational pillars. And so to show them falling symbolically is very interesting on that magical day. So then this gets us into Sirius symbology, as we were talking a little bit about in the last interview that we did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We got into a lot of the symbology around Sirius. And so it's interesting that Sirius, as we know it, is a binary star system. They also think it could be a trinary star system, but they're not sure what the 3rd sun is. Mm-hmm. And there's a possibility that we are in a trinary system with them because Sirius is only 8 light years away from us. And it's interesting because to the Masons, coming back to them, they have a representation of Sirius in their own symbology. But here on the left, this is what Sirius is symbolized as to the ancient Cometians or Egyptians. So you have the dome of the sky, which represents Nut. You have the star or locational point, which represents the brightest star in the eastern sky, which is Sirius. And then you have the obelisk, which is representation of the pillar. And so you have the pillar of the sky and the brightest star in the sky. But the pillar or the obelisk represents also a ray of light. And so it's a ray of light from the brightest star that rises in the east. This is Sirius. We get into Masonic symbology, and they call it the blazing sun or the blazing star or the hidden star. And so we see it all over Masonic symbolism as well. And so when you look at the back of the dollar bill, you have the pyramid with the all-seeing eye above it, representing the completed work. And there's 13 levels of the pyramid. And so it's interesting that there's the representation of 13. Mm-hmm. But this is overall, this is a representation of Sirius, the bright star or the blazing star. And so it ends up interestingly, in Masonic symbology. We were talking about it being a binary star system. And so what's fascinating about that is it was in the 1800s, but more so in the 1910 to 1920s, this discovery of this tribe in Africa called the Dogon. Basically, they're a tribe in Mali, Africa. They're super old. There's a thought that the Dogon were related to the original tribes of ancient Kemet, which the Greeks then named Egypt. And that will be our third interview lecture, is about Egypt
please.
and Kemet.
We're going to do that.
What's fascinating about the Dogon is they told the anthropologists that discovered them, basically, these two guys. A lot of this comes out of the Sirius Mystery, which is a great book by Temple, I believe is the guy that wrote it. And basically, these anthropologists discovered that the Dogon claim that they were visited by an aquatic race of people that came from the planets of Sirius. And what happened was these people were called the Namu. And they showed the Dogon tribe basically the orbital pattern of Sirius A and Sirius B as they rotate around each other, being a binary star system. And so the Dogon incorporated this into their fertility dances, basically. And so it's interesting that on the right, we have the actual astronomical linear extension of Sirius A and B as it rotates around itself. And on the left, we have the linear extension of the African model. This is the Dogon dance of fertility. And it's literally the same pattern as the orbital pattern of Sirius, which could not have been known because we had not discovered that Sirius was a binary star system until mid last century, like the 1940s, 1950s.
Exactly.
And so,
wow.
How did the Dogon know about
that?
this?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And it's accurate. I mean, incredibly accurate. And so there's a thought that the Dogon were actually visited by extraterrestrial visitations. And as we were discussing in our last podcast, Sirius is one of those planets that is found in every single ancient culture, every single one, and often is represented by a dog. And so it's interesting that here we have it in the Dogon tribe in the middle of Mali, Africa as well.
Didn't we talk about hands that they were the one that came to Lemuria first?
Right, correct.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
And we're part of the time of Atlantis, basically. I call it the time of Atlantis because everybody's hard set on Atlantis being a place that sank into the ocean. And I think Atlantis was more of a time period because if you read the Critias and the Timaeus, basically there were 5 capital cities. So what is Atlantis if it has 5 cities? Well, the city that sank was Poseidon. And several of these cities were in the Pacific, and this would have been, the Lemurian connection.
Okay.
But I think it was a time period, and it was very similar to the time period that we're in now, where instead of being isolated pockets of humanity, it was a global civilization, and they were traveling across the globe. We're told that oceans are not highways; they're barriers. But in reality, the oceans were used for millennia, in a sense.
Right.
So then this gets us into logos that are associated with Sirius. And so we have On Star. On for the ancient Cometians was the city of Heliopolis, which is what the Greeks named it, but it was the city of the sun or the blazing sun. And so On Star is interesting because here you have this sun star. So there is a hidden Masonic representation in the On Star logo. We look at Sirius Satellite Radio or Sirius FM, and it's always represented by a dog with a star in its eye, the dog star. Well, this is a nickname for Sirius as well. We then have the blazing star of the U.S. Army. So it's the star radiating out. We have the lone star of Texas, which then also becomes the Texaco logo. And so there's a blazing sun star of the Texaco logo as well, where the T could also have a Templar representation to it. We have Energy Star. So there's another representation of the blazing star. We have BP, the logo for BP. It looks like a flower, but it's also this blazing star. Star TV, Star Network, basically. Lockheed Martin, another one. Here's our connection to space in Sirius. And Starlink, again, this connection to the stars,
Right.
always representing Sirius in an interesting way. But we also find Sirius representation in the movies. And as I say, I like to always reference movies. And so in the Star Wars saga, we have Luke Skywalker staring into the twin setting suns of his planet of Tatooine. And so it's interesting because Sirius is a binary star system. And so here we have a binary star system represented in Star Wars. But in the Last Jedi movie, as I was discussing in our last interview, as Luke loses his energy and he disappears, he wests in a sense. He doesn't die, he just disappears and goes into the West. He's also looking into the twin setting suns of the West from the planet of Ahch-To, which is more of a watery planet. And so it's interesting that we have this binary star system representation in Star Wars, which makes one wonder, what are they trying to actually tell us? Well, you look at a movie like The Truman Show, and it's interesting because The Truman Show takes place underneath the dome of the sky. So here we have Nut, right? The representation of the Cometian or Egyptian sky. And around the middle of the movie, when Truman starts to wake up and realize that his reality is fake, one of the light fixtures from the artificial sky falls on the ground in front of him. And he's like, where did that come from? And he picks it up and he's looking up at the dome, the fake dome that he doesn't know is fake. And what is on the can itself? It says Sirius, 9 Canis Major. So this is the 9th star of Canis Major, which is Sirius. And Canis Major is the dog star constellation.
Right.
And so where is Sirius? Sirius is the eye of the dog in the dog constellation. But here in the Truman Show, it's right there on the canister for everybody to see in plain sight that there is a Sirius connection with the movie The Truman Show. So then this takes
the movie.
a lot of, we're told a lot of things through our movies that we don't even understand.
Because it's Simpson, I think is one of them.
Right. subtle representations, exactly. So this takes us into probably the oldest symbol that is still utilized today, and that is the symbology of Saturn. Saturnian symbology is very interesting. Saturn was known as our second sun to the ancients. There's a possibility that it was a lot closer to Earth during ancient times, because everything is kind of expanding outward in a sense from the sun. But it's interesting because in the night sky, when they would look at Sirius or at Saturn, it looked like either a winged disc or a horned bull. And so this is where a lot of this ancient symbology around Saturn comes from, such as Baal or Baal, which is a horned bull on top of a human body, basically, or a winged disc, which comes out of the Zoroastrian prophets. And so here you have Ahura Mazda in his winged disc flying across the sky. Well, this is a representation of Sirius. The winged disc is also seen on the lentils above buildings in ancient Egypt or Kemet. And so it's a winged disc with 2 serpents, coming out of it, which represent, the different aspects of life and the Nile. And then you have these 3 car logos or transportation logos. So you have Bentley, which is the winged disc. You have Mazda, which directly comes from Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian tradition, and it says that right on the Mazda, website, and that's where they got their name from. But it also is the representation of the winged disc. And then you have the Mini Cooper, same thing, a winged disc. And so the winged disc or Saturn shows up a lot in corporate logos because of its representation of time, of technology, of time travel, of travel in general. This is what Saturn represents. Saturn was known to the ancients as Kronos, the father of time. And he was known to eat his own children because over time, everything decays and dies. But if the father of time is constantly being represented, it's interesting that Kronos or Saturn was what they named it. And so Saturn was also known as Baal or Baal and Moloch. And so it's interesting that at the temple of Saturn, they decided to burn the statue of Baal, and they turned the temple of Saturn into a temple of Jupiter. And so this was a transition from worshiping the god of Saturn or the god of Kronos, the father of all gods, to changing that to worshiping Jove, which is represented by the planet Jupiter. And so the temple at Baalbek in Lebanon, was originally a Saturnian temple, but then it became a Jovian temple, or basically the temple of Jupiter. And so Baal also is the root structure of the word Babylon or Baal-Balon. And so basically they would sacrifice to Baal or Saturn or Moloch, because when Saturn comes out in the evening sky, it's usually in the fall, which is where the harvest starts. And then Saturn stretches through the winter into the spring, where you plant your next seeds. And then in the following fall, you reap your harvest. And so this is where the representation of Saturn as Kronos or as the Grim Reaper started to come from, and why you always see this representation of sacrifice around Saturn, Moloch, and Baal as well, because they're sacrificing to this god for a good harvest the next year. And so it's interesting that when we get into the stories of Moses goes up onto the mountain after taking the Hebrewites through the desert for 40 days or 40 years, depending on which story you're reading, after they fled from ancient Egypt or ancient Chem. When he comes down with the 10 or 15 commandments, Mel Brooks joke, there's 10 commandments. When he comes down with the 10 commandments from the hill, all of his followers have taken all of their gold and they have created this bull, and they were worshiping the bull. Well, it's interesting that the brazen bull is also this representation of the golden calf as well. And so the brazen bull was basically how they would sacrifice people to Moloch in one form or another. They would put the thieves or the murderers or the disgruntled citizens basically inside of this brazen bull or golden calf, lock it, and then light a fire underneath it. And this basically would boil down or cook down whoever this person was inside, and it would sound like the cow is mewing or whatnot.
Wow.
Because
Isn't that, can I ask you, Hans, is there's the sacrifice, I mean, this is what I heard,
yes,
I think the Bohemian to the Moloch. Is that what it is? The same thing?
at the Bohemian Grove. Well, hey, we're getting into that. What do you know? So
Oh,
these are some of the representations of Baal or Saturn, but also shown as Moloch or the Baphomet. And so it's interesting because you were talking about Bohemian Grove. In the center, where the fire is what they call the cremation of care. And so today it's a mock cremation. And so they have this metal skeleton that they basically wrap up as an effigy and they light it on fire. But in the olden times, this was actually done through sacrifice. And so as you see the representations of Saturn, he's always shown as the Grim Reaper. He has his scythe because that's how you reap the harvest, basically. And so he's culling the world or the sacrifice so that then humanity can have a harvest in the next year. And so he's always depicted with children. He's always depicted eating or sacrificing his children. And he's often depicted with a stumped left leg, like he's been injured in battle. And so this is interesting because this also flows over into other representations of Saturn. So to the ancient Romans, to the Greeks, he was Kronos, but to the ancient Romans, he was Saturn. And ancient Rome was known as Saturnia. And during the winter solstice, which is now our Christmas holiday, but during the 3 days of the winter solstice, they used to call it Saturnalia. And so this was a major winter festival right after the harvest. You reaped your harvest, and then everybody has a huge festival. And it was so successful that they would even allow the slaves to have table service and to drink with their masters. And so everybody was involved in Saturnalia. And so it's fascinating that this always also happened on Saturn's day, the day of Saturn. So each day of the week has its own symbology wrapped around it. Monday is moon day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, free day is the day of the angels. Saturday, Saturn's day. Sunday, the day of the sun. So the week restarts itself. And so this flows over into other cultures and other religious practices as well. And so in Egypt, we have Osiris, which was a representation somewhat of Saturn. A lot of people think Osiris was a representation of Sirius, but Osiris wasn't actually the ancient Commission name of the god. Osiris is the Greek name of the god. And so Osiris was also known as Bu Wizir or Wisir. And this is where Wisiris or Osiris comes from. And so Saturn was known as the wise. And so Osiris is known as the wise. And so this is where that overlap representation comes from. But then in India, we have Shani Bhagwan. And so Shani Bhagwan is always depicted with black skin. He has 4 arms. Each one has a tool or a weapon in it. And he flies on his chariot, which is a black crow. And the black crow is a representation of rebirth and revitalization. And so what day is Shanavara worshipped on? Well, Shanavara. Shanavara is Saturday to the Hindu, belief system. And so it's interesting that this god representing Saturn is also worshipped on Saturn's day, even though in Hindi, Saturn is not a word. And Saturn's Day is not a word either. It's Shanavara. And so Shani Bhagwan is worshipped on Shanavara. Wow. And so what else is fascinating about Saturn is that it has this symbology of the hex or hexagon. And the ancients could not have known this. But when we sent the Voyager space probe to Saturn, and it started taking photos of the North and South Pole, and this was like 1975, the photos it sent back showed that the North Pole of Saturn had 2 hexagon storms, one rotating in one direction, and inside of that, the other one rotating in the other direction, which is very bizarre. I mean, how in nature is a hexagonal storm created? And then when they started seeing all the photos of the different moons of Saturn, most of them have hexagonal craters. How is this possible? I mean, it's almost impossible. And so the hexagon or hexagonal shape is also very representational with the Merkaba, which we talked a lot about in the last show. Yeah. And so the Merkaba are 2 tetrahedrons. One is rotating in one direction, and the other one is shoved up inside, rotating in the other direction. And what it does is it creates this energy field inside of the rotating, because one is rotating one way, one is rotating the other way. And this creates a vortex or a torsion field. And so it's interesting that in different people's works, Dr. Joseph Farrell, Walter Bosley, why can't I think of the other guy's name off the top of my head? Richard, where is it? Richard Hoagland's work. That's right. He talks a lot about torsion fields. And so if you take this Merkaba shape that's here on the left, and you put that inside of a sphere, where each one of those triangles hits the outer side of the sphere is around the 33rd degree parallel. And this is where all of our major like physical aspects of Earth or energy aspects of Earth are represented. So if you do this in our northern hemisphere, where one of these triangular points is where the island of Hawaii is, which is our largest continuous ongoing volcano. If you do the same representation around Jupiter, this is where the eye of Jupiter is. You can do the same representation around Saturn. You have the eye of Saturn. Around Uranus, I mean, all of the planets have this interesting tetrahedral vortex or torsion field within its structure.
That's
and
crazy.
So sorry, what?
That's crazy. Yeah, to just think about that. Yeah.
So the Merkaba, these are 3 words that come out of the ancient Suf or Comitian language. Mer means water. This is where we get the word merchant from, or mercantile, or marine. This all comes from this word mer, or water. Ka is your physical body or your body double, and Ba is your spirit. So the Merkaba is your water, body, and spirit. And this is how you astral project your form through the dimensions of time and space to other planets, realms, suns, solar systems, and even galaxies. And so it's interesting that the Merkaba energy is also associated directly with Saturn. And so this gets into Solomon and his seals. And Solomon was interesting because he was very instrumental in the creation of ancient Israel, in a sense. and he was a master sorcerer. And so he created all these sigils and seals. And I have this great book called The Grimoire of Heaven and Hell, which basically has all of the Solomonic seals within it. And so what they represented and what they did was they had the ability to attract angelic or demon beings and then ensnare them and control them. Very similar to what the Merkaba energy does. It creates this energy field or this trap, in a sense, that your physical form can then be safe within from exterior, or be trapped within from exterior, depending. And so Solomon's seal was made from brass overlapping iron, and so these two elements held the demonic or angelic energies within them. And Sol Oman is also another one of these word plays of ancient words, where Sol means the sun, Om is the sound of the universe, and On is the city of the sun. And Solomon becomes the sun sound, of the universe, basically. Solomon. And so Solomon's seals are very, very fascinating. This gets us into more of Saturnian representation. And Saturn is always known as the black cube. And so a cube, if we were to look at a cube as a two-dimensional object, not a three-dimensional object, the cube is also a hexagon. And so here's the representation of the hexagon. And so in Judaism, they worship El, the Elohim or Jehovah, the Most High, in a sense. El is a word that comes from Saturn. El came from Baal. And so Baal then got shortened to El, and El became the god of gods. And this is, the god of the heavens. And so the Jews will wear this thing called tefillin, mostly the Talmudic Jews, and they either will put it above their crown chakra where their pineal gland is, so they're getting a direct, godlike transformation. Inside of the box is a prayer to El, basically. It's got the tetragrammaton prayer within it, in a sense. Or they will wrap it around their heart arm and have it on their heart arm. And so it's interesting because Yahweh was considered a warrior god. And El was the head of the early Israelite pantheon. So El and Yahweh are considered kind of the same person, but El comes directly from Saturn. And so this black cube is a representation of, the Most High, but also a representation of Saturn. So this also gets us into Islam. And so this is the Kaaba. And the Kaaba is located in Mecca. It's it is their holiest city. And once a year they have the Hajj. And once in your lifetime as a devout Muslim, you will go to Mecca and you will walk around the Kaaba, the black building or the black cube building, 7 times in a circle and counterclockwise. So here you have the rings of Saturn and the building of Saturn, the black cube, and sitting in the eastern corner in a silver yoni, facing where Sirius rises on the east during the Hajj, which is at the end of July, early August, is the Kaaba stone, which, as we talked about in our last episode, is a representation of the Sintamani stone.
Right.
It was a piece of meteorite that fell from Sirius during the Hajj. And so we have the Saturnian representation of the black cube. We have the yoni, or Vesica Pisces, or the representation of the goddess with the silver yoni. And then we have the representation of Sirius with the Kaaba stone. And what's even more fascinating about this structure is it originally was not an Islamic structure. The black cube building was actually commissioned by the Queen of Sheba. So it was a goddess temple before it ever became an Islamic temple. And so it's interesting that this is a direct relation to Sirius and Saturn, for that matter, all over again, dealing with the black cube. And so we find, here's the representation. We find this everywhere. And so here's a picture of the North Pole of Saturn. And so you see it has this hexagonal storm, and inside of it is another hexagonal storm going the other direction. What is creating that? We don't really know.
Wow.
And so these are all the other representations of Saturn. We have the symbolic representation of Saturn, which is the cross and the scythe, basically. We have the black cube. We have the black hexagon. And then we start seeing the black cube found all over the world as a sculpture. We have one in Munich. There's one in Prague. There's, they're all over the place. There's one in Las Vegas. We even have a representation of Michael Jackson wearing a very Saturnian costume, and the name of his album is Escape, right? And so it's dealing with time, it's dealing with
Mm.
all these different, representations of Saturn or of Kronos, the father of time. We
Mm.
also find Saturnian symbology in the movies. And so in Alien from 1979, we have Archeon, or LV-426, located in the Zeta Reticuli constellation, which is a very Saturnian-looking planet. And so they're telling us right there in the movie, we have a representation or worship of Saturn. We're sacrificing through the movies to this god Saturn, or Kronos, in a sense. In Prometheus, same thing. We have LV-223, and it also looks like a Saturnian planet. When we get into Interstellar, where does the super black hole show up? It shows up around the orbit of Saturn, which is
Wow.
very interesting. And what does it look like? It looks very Saturnian as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Cooper comes back through time, where does he show up? He shows up at Cooper Station, hundreds of years in the future, or 100 years in the future. And what is it orbiting? It's orbiting Saturn. And so there's always this representation of Saturn throughout the course of history. And like I said, it's one of the oldest symbols that we still use today. A lot of people don't even recognize or realize that we're using it. So you get into, the Bill and Ted's franchise, basically. In the first movie, you have this cube, the telephone booth, that's taking them through time. So there's this time travel element related to the cube or the booth. And as we see in the movie poster, we have the Earth, the Moon, and Saturn. Well, why is Saturn there? Saturn isn't near Earth.
Yeah.
In Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, they go into the underworld, and who is their guide through the underworld? Well, it's the Grim Reaper. It's Saturn. It's Kronos. So there's your Saturnian representation in the second movie. And in the third movie, when they play their music at the end, it brings all the planets toward Earth. And so, like on the first movie poster, we have the Earth, the Moon, and Saturn represented right there, in the movie posters. And so why is Saturn constantly being, put in front of us in very subtle terms? Well, let's look at some of the logos around Saturn. And this is where things get very interesting. And so these are all Saturnian logos. You have the original NASA logo, which shows a planet with a ring around it. And so this ring is, again, a representation of, Saturnian magic from ancient times. Boeing, right? Boeing also has this planet with a ring around it. You have the rings of the Wi-Fi logo. You have the ring around Saturn of DirecTV. The Intel logo is interesting because it has a ring around it as well, but also hidden within it is L. So Intel, right? Intelligence, or Inter-L, or L as in the god L, all represented in a Saturnian ring style logo. We have Internet Explorer from Microsoft, also the E representing L with the ring around it, representing Saturn. Universal Studios, same thing. It's a ring around a planet in a sense. We have the cube of 9Cube, which is a company out of Korea, where you have a cube within a cube within a cube, but it also looks like the number 9. Well, as we talked earlier about the number 9, the 9 and the cube are very represented together, and so that's interesting. We have the Target logo. Well, Target logo is also fascinating because it shows a planet with rings around it, or a ring around it. But this is also the symbol for the sun from ancient Kemet. So it was always represented by a circle with a dot in it, and was known as Un, or On. So then we have Sega Saturn, right? So here's another technology or game station, basically, the Sega Saturn. The Xbox, X marks the spot, but it also is a representation of rings around a planetary system. Similar to 9Cube, we have GameCube. Well, the GameCube is, another gaming console, where the cube of the logo also makes the G, and hidden within the G in the negative space is the C for GameCube, but it also has 3 different cubes represented within it. The outer G, the hidden space of the C, and then the cube in the middle. And so this is GameCube. Nike, another one, is representation of one of the rings of Saturn, even though it's supposed to be one of the wings of Nike, the one of the the Greek gods in the pantheon. It also represents Saturn, travel. There's a lot dealing with travel and technology, and so we have the Toyota logo. Same thing. You have this ring shapes around a planetary system.
Right.
Nissan, same thing. Rings around a planetary system. The Saturn car itself is directly named after Saturn. AAA, same thing. You have this planet with rings around it. Capital One, planet or a ring system, basically. And we also start seeing the Saturnian symbols show up in AI.
Wow.
And so this is fascinating because OpenAI is a ring system around a hexagon. So here we have a Saturnian, representation with the OpenAI logo. Microsoft also has their AI system as well, and so the Microsoft AI logo is a bunch of rings represented, around a central system. And then we have the two Google representations of AI as well, which are both one is like a ringed hexagon again, and the other one looks like two ring structures around something in the center. Another company that deals with AI is Lumia, and so Lumia looks like a ringed system around a planet. And same with Invitae. I mean, it's a bunch of rings around a planetary system. And so this is basically the representation of artificial intelligence, godlike intelligence, travel, time travel. All these different elements deal with Saturn because of its ancient, system of.
So with this, Hans, what is the significance of Saturn? You think it's like a portal, the wormholes?
There's a good question about that, and the ancients saw it as our second sun. And so I find that fascinating because it could be the remnants of a collapsed brown star or brown sun, basically, a brown dwarf. We don't really know. I mean, we know all that we know from our instrumentation and sending probes there, but we really don't know its entire makeup.
So do you know why all these symbols are using Saturn symbology?
Again, this comes from ancient times, and it's almost like there's a brotherhood or a fraternity of Saturn that is being used to control different elements of society today.
Yeah, these are a big corporation too. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of these corporations existed, prior to the internet or, anything out there. And so before people could go in and actually look this stuff up,
right, before
they were being they were being bombarded subtly by the Saturnian energy without even knowing it. And
wow,
you go to the Bohemian Grove, they're still worshiping Saturn or Moloch.
Yeah.
You look at all the religions in the world, even though they have this religious aspect to God. If you look at the base roots of all these religions, they're all worshiping Saturn, the original God, the father of time.
Yeah. So it's interesting because in astrology, Saturn would be considered kind of like a harsh lessons for many people.
Right.
Saturn return. You're aware of that, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, very interesting.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's also where the hex, element comes into. If you want to, as Jordan Maxwell used to always say, you want to throw a hex on somebody, you're basically cursing them with Saturnian energy. But the hex is what represents the hexagon of Saturn. And so it's interesting, why is this hexagon around Saturn? How did the ancients know this? That's where things are very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to get into the other half of my lecture here. I was gonna exit out of the share.
Yeah. So how did you get all this symbology together? How did you ties all this in together, Hans?
I initially was looking at the magic symbols, basically. And so I had realized that going through school, that these three shapes, the triangle, the circle, and the square, were all represented in every other symbol. And so I started looking high and low into other symbols to see what I could start finding. And then I came across two researchers, probably late 90s, early 2000s. One of them was Michael Tessarian. and the other was Freeman Fly, and they were both talking about all these occult symbols and the satanification of Hollywood, and really interesting topics. And I started realizing that even Dan Brown talks about symbology in his books, like the Da Vinci Code. I mean, his main character in his books is a symbologist, and so it's interesting that these symbols
Well, what's interesting, what you
are
just
around us all day long. I mean, we're constantly bombarded by symbols, and we don't really even realize that we're
what the
being
symbol does to us is like hypnotizing.
right.
Yeah, put you on that program. You just talk about the word satanic. That's very similar to Saturn.
Right, correct.
Yeah. So in this session, there's a lot of repetition of Sirius planets and a Saturn. There's a big connection between these two.
Yes.
So what did you come out with that? Is it because we have been controlled by
Well, it's interesting because in a lot of this symbology comes out of seasons or festival seasons, basically. So during the summer or the dog days of summer, this is when Sirius rises above the horizon. And so Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky. If we look at Sirius in the night sky, you can go from Sirius diagonally up to the right, and you have the 3 belt stars of Orion. So there's this connection with Orion and Sirius as well. And so it's almost as if the Orion's belt points at Sirius. And so Sirius had this symbolic representation to a lot of the ancients, because of when it arises. It's only out for a few months of the year, but it starts in the middle of the summer. And so this is the dog days of summer. Saturn is a harvest planet.
Yeah.
So when you're going into the harvest and you're harvesting your crops, Saturn is in the night sky. And as I said, then it takes you through the winter into the spring, where you re-sow or sow all your new seeds, and then the next harvest you reap what you sow. And so this is the Saturnian representation. And because it dealt with the harvest, it also dealt with being the god of gods, because the harvest is what creates life for us. But if Saturn is the god of gods, it's creating life for basically the entire universe in a sense. And so it's not just a planetary harvest. It's
interesting,
like
because again,
as above, so below, right? It's this refraction of what's going on in the universe.
Exactly. And then when you mention, we go back to astrology again, Saturn would be considered the grandfather, or the father or the elder, So
describe a little bit about Saturn returns, because I get into astrology. I think
Saturn return comes
super
like
deep into that.
every 28 years, and when Saturn return, there's always a time that's always a big change in our life. Usually it's difficult or like huge change.
Okay.
But through these changes, it actually make us better, actually. It's like we learn, and when you have a second Saturn return, then another like storm hit your life. But then if you, can go through that storm and you learn your lessons through this Saturn return, or, the energy, you get the rewards. That's what they said. You get
interesting.
And usually the Saturn would come in late. It's like a late reward, and you have to go through all these storms.
And that, in a sense, is the harvest. And so when it returns is when you're planting the new seeds of your life. That then you harvest, and this is your Saturn return in your own life. Interesting.
You get the benefit from all this hard work. That's what the Saturn planet. Let's say if the planet is in a relationship house, that means there might be a lot of lesson and difficulty through relationships, and the person may end up marry late. Usually Saturn will take a long time to complete or accomplish, where Jupiter gives a lot more abundance and a lot of easy path as Jupiter, more luck. That's
and I think this might have been why Saturn or Baal or Moloch in the old times was then shifted to Jupiter or Jove, because they saw the negative aspects of Saturn, the yin yang, the good luck, the bad luck, and they're like, well, let's just always have luck. And so
Hmm.
and fortune. And so they moved into more of Jovian times or Jove times, Jovile times. And this is where Jupiter
Interesting.
comes in.
Interesting. And it just looks like we have a lot of influence, by the Sirius star system. Or the
Yes.
yeah. So that makes me even wonder if many of us are from Sirius from the beginning.
Good question. Sirius is one of those star systems that NASA and the space agencies and the astronomers out there haven't really paid a lot of attention to.
That's the same
They're
thing
like,
as the Seven Sister, right? The
no,
Sirius.
Seven Sisters is Pleiades,
Oh, the Palladian. That's right. I got that
which is
on.
interesting because there's more than 9 stars. There's more than 12 stars in the Palladian system, but we only see 7 of them super bright. But there's
Right.
there's a lot more stars. I've always wondered why they called it the Seven Sisters.
Right.
But
Right.
but Sirius is interesting because not a lot of research has been done. It's like, oh well, we saw it. Great, let's move on to the next star. And it's like, but it's a binary star system. There's
Uh-huh.
definitely planets around the binary star system. We're told that there are 2 planets, but there could be a lot more. And because Sirius is a binary system and it's part of um, Canis Major constellation, how close are those stars to the Sirius stars themselves is a good question. And
Right.
what kind of interplanetary relationships are there? Because I mean, honestly, we'd be fools to think that we're all alone in this universe when we have billions upon billions upon billions of stars that have Goldilocks planets that could give life.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be foolish for us to have that kind of ego and think that
I
we're
just
the
feel
only
like
ones.
we are in the beginning of changes, in discovering more of a different star system, or even have a visitation from a different star uh, or civilizations.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's interesting, even looking into the Buddhist cultural mysticism from our last topic,
Yeah.
how often Sirius comes up, to different cultures. And it's like all these people are coming from Sirius. All these ascended Tolku masters are astral projecting themselves to and from Sirius. And so it's why Sirius,
Yeah.
Seriously, why Sirius?
Seriously, why serious, right? Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, fascinating, I mean, I would love to have the audience post comments, if you know any of this answer that, I just asked. Please
I mean,
feel free to post
this
comments.
is all just, for me, a lot of my research, this is all just an introductory. I mean, you could write books and read, hundreds of books on Sirius and,
We did get
Sirius
a lot of things
representation.
that's fascinating in this talk, Hans. Even the last one about the Sirius and the Buddhist monk, very, very fascinating. I mean, for you to be able to put all those symbols together with the connection with the ancient civilization, that's profound. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can't even
It
see that.
it's information and then it's pattern recognition because you start realizing that, these aren't standalone instances, right?
Yeah.
So you start seeing these patterns, and once you start seeing them, the triangle, the circle, and the square, for instance, you can't unsee them. Everywhere you're going to go, you're going to start seeing, oh, a triangle, a circle, a square, oh, all these different elements. Yeah,
Yeah, well, I
and
mean,
so
I don't think a lot of people see things like you see, because what you see is pretty fascinating, though. And I guess because you were born in that part of the world that you got involved with this mysticism, that's why it
I,
got you to open up your mind, to see deeper than most people. I have to say that.
I think that had, there's a lot of that in my upbringing. I didn't have a TV growing up, so I had a very active imagination, and I was very immersed in local lore and legend of Nepal and India and Tibet. And so it definitely opened my mind and my eye up to different ways of looking at things, I guess, in a sense.
I would say different dimension. You
Yeah,
actually look into so many different dimension, and it's very, very deep and very fascinating. And not many people have this gift doing that. Even I have I mean, I'm a metaphysical teacher. When I as a teacher, I think you have it very, very profoundly, very, very deep. I mean, I think you were a Buddhist monk before, or maybe you're from Sirius or from Saturn.
how interesting. There is a lot of
For you to
overlap.
bring the knowledge. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I definitely I put a lot more. Obviously, this is just an introduction.
Yeah,
The,
yeah.
the
Well, we
second
can
half
do
of my
some more.
lecture is
Yeah, we can
the
do
second
some
half of
more
my
on it.
lecture is is about symbology in movies, and we were talking about AI in movies, basically.
That's
But a
awesome.
lot of it you can also find in my book.
Yes, please go ahead and tell the audience how they can find you and how they can get your book. How many books do you have so far?
I have two. I have what we talked about last week, which was the Dropa Legends and Lore.
Yes.
And then I now have the Magic of Symbols, which is my second book,
I see. I know
which
that.
talks a lot about what I just went over, but also gets into numerology, symbology. It gets into different cultural symbologies as well.
Well, how you got into numerology is fascinating with number 9, number 8. What does number 8 represents? Do you know? I didn't get to ask you that. To you.
To me, in general, 8 is a number that always shows up around finances. And because you want finances to be infinite. And so infinity, becomes part of this magical number 8. And so it's very auspicious in a sense that if you're going to do something, that the gematria of what you're doing adds up to 8. So if you're sending somebody a bill, the bill, should equal 8. Or if you're selling something, the numbers should equal 8. Like I have a course coming up that I'm selling on best practices of design in business and creating a recognizable brand. And so the course is 5 weeks and it's $998.
Oh, I didn't know it teach. That's
so
awesome.
998 is 27. 27 is 9, but it's also there's also that representation of 8 in there. And so if I do a 997, then it would equal 8. And so there's always some representation of 8 around finances and around monetary aspects, basically prosperity. And so 8 has this prosperous number. 9 is the number of the work because it can always be replicated over and over and over again. So always
in Thai culture in Thailand where I'm from, they actually would have someone create their phone number that will bring abundance or bring money or bring luck. So that must be this kind of same concept that you have here, where every number, I don't know which number they put, but every number will come up to probably 8 to bring
8
that. Right.
It's good possibility there. That's interesting about phone numbers.
Maybe you should look into something like that. And
I will. Yeah, no. A friend of mine put together her business name and whatnot, and so she went to a numerology coach and figured out the best way of representing her name, where the numerology was in good fortune for who she is.
Wow. Well, because the numbers all the numbers are vibration,
Right, correct.
Yeah. So you have your class coming up. And that
class coming up, yeah.
Okay. Can we repeat that again so the audience know? And definitely, please do send me the information, Hans. I'm going to put it under description under this video. So if any of you guys would be interested in taking Hans' class, definitely connect with him.
Oh, I'll definitely have to put that together. So I haven't structured when I'm actually doing the course. I'm going through a business coaching class right now, and so part of that is to write a book. Well, I've written 2, but not so much around my esoteric knowledge or occult research. This is more around what I do for a living, and so it's dealing with the best practices of graphic design.
Oh, nice.
And so, I mean, to give you my little stump pitch, right? I'm Hans Dietrich. Yes. I'm an award-winning graphic designer that does graphic and presentation design. I also own a small business called Mod Creatives Inc. We're a very ambitious small business here in Portland, Oregon. We have local, national, and international clients. And we service industries such as Fortune 500, big technology companies, medical technology companies, government and non-government organizations, nonprofits, health and sexual well-being, international health and development, finance, transportation, sports, hospitality and casinos, food and beverage industries.
Everything. So here you go.
So pretty much everything. And basically, what we do is we're proficient in identity, logos, and branding, as well as advertisement and marketing design. But we excel in presentation design, especially for C-level keynotes, product briefs, case studies, and pitch decks.
Wow.
And because we're such a small company, we have the ability to give our clients a more personalized design experience as we bring your ideas to life.
I like that.
I grew up in Nepal, from an early age, so it wasn't always me doing design. But while living in Nepal, as I said earlier, I was immersed in the lore and legends of Nepal through the Mahabharata, the Purana Vedas, even the Ramayana and stories like this. And I was surrounded by all this symbology, whether it be Buddhist or Hindu art and architecture, or even the sacred geometry of the Baha'i and Islamic religions, because they're not allowed to depict people. And so all of this has helped sculpt what I do for a living. It's part of my multicultural designs that I do. And basically, I like to get into a little bit of the aspect of the best practices of design and business, and bring to light some of the new trends that are being set in motion, these new industry standards that deal with accessibility and ADA compliance. And so this is a big one going into the design world, because as we were talking about artificial intelligence earlier, if you start looking at AI art and AI design and all the amazing advancements around this, there's one fundamental question that's not being asked, and it's totally being ignored. And the question is all this artificial AI design and art ADA compliant and accessibility compliant? And the short answer is no, it isn't, because there's too much use of colors, there's too many textures, there's 3D elements being used, there's object strokes, there's drop shadows, there's reflections, there's lens flares, and all this makes it very difficult for somebody with disabilities to engage. And so it's fundamental that we keep our designs and our logos as simple as possible to reach more of an audience. And so, the ultimate question is, what is the most important element of your business? Anyone in the audience? Anyone?
Yeah, post it there.
It's your identity. It's your logo. It's how you are represented in your industry.
True.
This is the most important element. A logo is very similar, in a sense, to a server working in a restaurant. The server represents the restaurant. The logo represents the company, right?
True.
So as a customer of a restaurant, the first person that you meet and the last person that you meet is your server. And so that first impression is what your experience in the restaurant will be, that you take away with you, the emotional experience, the physical, experience. Your logo should be very similar to this. The first thing that your customers see is your logo, and the experience that they have with you is what they take away emotionally and physically and visibly from working with your company. So your logo is super important. Well, your logo is made up of 4 elements. Well, at least it should be. The first element is your emblem. This is a symbol, going back to symbology here. This is a symbol that represents your company voice, your company culture, your services, and your products, in a sense. So your emblem is a representation of that symbolically. Then you have your word mark, like FedEx, right? Yeah. It's a stylized font that spells out your company name, but also could spell out your tagline or your slogan. Then you have your company mood, and your mood is represented through the color choices and color combinations that you use for your logo, basically.
All right.
And then you have your company tone, which is the 4th element. And the company tone comes to you through whatever fonts you choose. And so I use a methodology of 3 font styles. One is bold, one is sexy, or one is elite. And every single logo and word mark out there falls into one of these categories. The bold category is for a company that's like, hi, here we are, impact. And it's usually aimed at, younger to older generations, but mostly masculine energy.
That's right.
The sexy font is more of an italicized or cursive font, something like Coca-Cola, for instance. It's softer, it's more familiar, and therefore it's aimed at younger to older generations, but mostly around a more feminine energy. And so this is beverages or food or health products usually fall into this, because you don't want something screaming in your face. You want to feel comfortable around this product.
Food and nutrition is feminine energy.
Yeah, very, very much so. And then elite is a thin line font for companies that don't need wow statement or the impact statement or the familiarity. They're already established. They're already respected. They're already elite. And so we find this is aimed at more conservative, more of a conservative crowd in a sense, but we find these logos in the elite sector to be stuff usually around finances or around law firms or legal firms. But then you can also have combinations of all these as well. So you can have a bold elite logo, you can have a bold sexy logo, or you can have an elite sexy logo. An elite sexy logo basically would be a signature. Somebody's product is a signature. And so it's like Janet's photography, right? Janet would be the signature and photography would be in an elite font. So this kind of gives you an idea of that. But it's crucial that we keep our logos simple and intuitive. And so in order to finally pass, accessibility and ADA compliance, they have to go through a series of checklists. And so there's 3 important checklists that every logo should be able to complete. The first is the logo has to be readable and recognizable. We usually use the word legible, but I don't like that word. So readable and recognizable as it was designed. So the design elements that you chose, the color mood that you chose, and the font tone that you chose has to be recognizable and readable to be in a compliant state. You have to be able to read and recognize your logo at a distance, like looking at it on a billboard, or up close and personal, like a coffee mug or something where you're looking at it on a product. And lastly, you have to be able to take your logo and make it one color and have it still be readable and recognizable. So for instance, a white logo that can be used on a dark background or a dark logo that can be used on a light background. This is what helps logos become accessible and more compliant so that more people have the ability to experience your logo, whether they're disabled or not, or your designs in a sense.
Wow.
And so everybody's why is different for decision making. My why for this is because I want people to be informed about what's coming in the next year or so around ADA compliance and accessibility, because you don't want to get caught in massive legal fees if your designs aren't accessible or ADA compliant and somebody with disabilities decides to sue you. And in 2025, the gates are open. I mean, a lot of companies are starting.
A lot of AI technology, yes, for sure.
Well, a lot of companies are starting to shift in this direction. But, I also want to travel the world and be able to do business while sitting on a comfortable beach somewhere or riding a camel next to the pyramids.
And you guys can contact him anytime, anywhere.
Exactly. Or trekking in the Himalayas. And with technology today, we have the ability to do this.
That's so true. It doesn't matter where you went in the world, you can do this work. Yeah.
In high school, I didn't have the internet, and I predicted my senior year that I would be riding on the back of a camel doing work in Egypt, and I did this in 2016 on my laptop. I made my dream come true. So that's kind of the aspect around all of that, and
that's pretty cool, though. Hans, I never thought with all this being involved with your work, but I like the way you just share with us. You put a lot of all these important ingredients, what you just share into it. And someone like me would have a background like you, we wouldn't be able to figure out that's how important it is for you to put all these ingredients in. Pretty cool.
If you had the best logo or ad design in your industry, how many more clients would you have?
Right.
And this is a great question. And so
that's why you got this cooperation with all this.
That's why I'm doing a course as well. I want to bring attention to other designers, decision makers at companies, and even the executive branch of how to audit their own designs, basically, how to improve upon those, how to figure out basically how to design a good logo, how to design a good advertisement, and thus how to create a recognizable and successful brand.
So you teach this as well. You offer.
Yeah, I'm teaching this. Yeah.
Cool. Well, if any audience would like to learn from Hans, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I will keep you posted because it won't be on my my Megamist website. So Megalithic Mysteries or megamist.com is where you can find all my esoteric stuff and a lot of my travel knowledge.
Yeah.
But I also have my own company, Mod Creatives Inc.
Yeah.
And I'm basically the founder, owner, and I also do all the art direction. And so I can help you audit your own designs. I can audit them for you.
Nice, nice.
You can hire me to help build you, a successful brand and logos as well. Or you can take my course and
You're very knowledgeable, Hans. I mean, for you
learn
to
it as
put
well.
all these symbols and you have an eye to see all this very deep, that's fascinating. That tells a lot about your gift, your talents, that you're very good at what you're doing. So please do give me the link to your 2 books and also, how people can contact you for your first course that you are going to be teaching.
I definitely will. So my first 2 books are found through lulu.com. When I do my book on design, I'm going to go through Amazon.
Yeah, send me the link so that people can actually go click the link, and which I'm going to put in the description,
Okay.
because there were people asking me where they can get your book on, but I know one of them got your book, Dropa. I think that was
excellent.
She did
Yes.
tell me. But there were a few that asked me like, where can I get the book? I said, go to his site. I have the link. But you guys, if you'd like to talk today, you would like to know more about the symbol, the magic of the symbols, definitely Hans going to send me the information, the links underneath this description on this video. And please go ahead and connect with him if you want to take any of his classes. I think it's fascinating. And actually,
I'm also lecturing a week from Friday, so it'll be the 19th. So the 17th to the 19th is I want to say a workshop conference located in Mount Shasta.
Oh, yes.
You can find out more information. I'll send you the link to this as well under the promiserevealed.net.
I know Rob. Yes, he's
it's through Rob Potter. And I believe if you're going to buy tickets, you can use my name, Hans, Hans, all in lowercase, or Hans D for Hans Dietrich. All in lowercase, and you'll get
I know Rob.
Percentage off.
Rob. I interviewed him before.
Oh, awesome. So I'm fascinated to go there. I've never been to Shasta, so I'm very interested in looking into the energies there, looking into the Lemurian connections there. Oh, and I'll be speaking about the Dropa Stones and what we talked about last week at 9 a.m. on Friday.
People are gonna love it. People are gonna love it.
And then I believe it's at 1:30. I have a workshop dealing with an introduction to chematology, the land of Kemet, an alternative to the Greek Egyptian history that we've all learned in school.
Let's do another interview with you, even a few more.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And if you guys interested in going to Mount Shasta, please do, and then attend actually you can send me a link. I think Rob sent
it's the 17th to the 21st, so it's Wednesday to Sunday.
July, yes.
July, and it'll be in Mount Shasta. There's a lot of amazing people that will be speaking there. I'm incredibly grateful to be there as well.
Well,
and so that's the next lecture series I have coming up, and then I believe Wednesday I might be doing a Woo Woo Wednesdays podcast with a friend of mine, Crypto Alchemist. But I think I'm also doing a podcast with Walter Bosley, and so
please do send me a link for all your podcast.
I will definitely do that. And then again in October, I think we have another alien event and Biomed Expo in Las Vegas, and so I believe I'll be at that
in October.
Should be incredibly fascinating.
If I come back from Thailand, I'll go there. It would be nice to go.
I'll have my books there, and probably will lecture about the Dropa as well as Egypt and chematology. I think I have 2 slots, but I'm not entirely sure yet. So
cool.
That's what's coming up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hans.
Thank you.
It's absolutely amazing. I love that. And we'll get you back again for more talk, more symbology, and as well as Egypt, ancient what Kemet, is that what it's called? That place?
Kemet, yes. Kem, the land of the black soil.
I heard about that too, yes. So, thank you so much, Hans, for being here today. Thank you for your time and your knowledge, your gift, and thank you everyone for watching this video. If you like it, please do subscribe. click like and share this video. If this is the right thing to do, is, you know, to share his gift. He's very gifted person that, you know, he can share a lot of stuff. I mean, your stuff is very fascinating and very different, and it's nice to be able to share it to the world. Buy his books, just click the links and just go straight right into that, you know, the magic of symbols and also the Dropa. If you haven't seen his last video, please click. I'm going to put links for that last video so you can watch. Well,
Yeah, it's a lot longer of a interview, but both
yes,
of them are introductions to much larger topics. So
yes,
I appreciate your
absolutely.
time, and I'm very grateful to be here. So
No,
thank you so
likewise.
much.
I appreciate your time very much, and let's do that again. We'll figure out the date, and don't forget to email me, and that way people can connect with you. Thank you
Links in
so
the
much.
description.
There you go, right
Links in the
down there. Thanks
description.
a lot, guys. Until the next video, we're gonna do that. Thanks a
Excellent.
lot, Hans.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
wonderful, wonderful day.
You
Thank
too.
you, everyone. Yes.